I'm starting.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, and welcome to the Digital Disruption and Future of the Firm webinar. We are delighted that you have joined us today. My name is Sonika, and I am your host. Our presenter today is Sourabh Hajela. Before we start, I just want to take a moment to go over some housekeeping rules. This webinar will last for about 1 hour. Sourabh will present for 40 to 45 minutes, and the last 15 to 20 minutes will be spent answering any questions presented by you, the audience. Please note that the control panel is on the right side of your screen. You may communicate or submit your questions to me through the chat button. Should you drop your connection, please dial back in. In the unlikely event that our connection is dropped, please wait 5 minutes and then dial back in. Make sure your microphone is on mute at all times. We will start the webinar with a poll and would appreciate your response. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Sourabh Hajela, the founder, CEO, and executive editor of CIO Index. He is an award-winning thought leader, management consultant, trainer, and entrepreneur with over 28 years of experience in strategy, planning, and delivery of IT capability to maximize shareholder value for Fortune 50 corporations across major industries in North America, Europe, and Asia. Sourabh is experienced in creating enterprise-wide IT capability driven by the entire range of business situations, such as new market entry, business process re-engineering, post-merger integration, and cross-process integration. Sourabh has served as head of e-business at ING USFS and Prudential Financial. He has held leadership positions with top-tier consulting firms such as A.T. Kearney and Booz Allen, marketing and leading engagements in strategy, e-business, and IT strategy. His research interest is in a business-focused quantitative approach and associated frameworks to create IT capability to maximize shareholder value, with special emphasis on the measurement and monitoring of IT investment returns. He has authored white papers on IT strategy, e-strategy, IT investment management, IT governance, enterprise architecture planning, and many more. He is currently working on a book on IT strategy. Sourabh was recognized for his thought leadership by being awarded the A.T. Kearney Intellectual Capital Silver Medal. Without further ado, I present to you Mr. Sourabh Hajela. Hello, Sourabh. It's all yours.
Thank you, Sonika. Good morning, and good morning, everybody. My name is Sourabh, and I am delighted to be with you this morning. And I am absolutely ecstatic that you all decided to join me for this very interesting and important topic, because digital disruption is all around us. And some connotations I don't agree with, and I'm about to present my point of view to you and see if you all agree with me, so we can push this discussion forward. The whole concept of a digital disruption has started with technology, and I think the focus is very technology based. So if there's one thing that I do this morning, it is to try and present to you that it's not about technology, it's about business and how to think in terms of the business value, the business changes that technology is bringing about, and that's where all of the value of digital disruption is. The second thing I want to do is I want us as a technology community to start thinking in terms of technology when we thinking in terms of business, when we talk about such flavors of the month. Digital disruption happens to be the one for this month. So I want to start this discussion by a definition of digital disruption, and I'll take you through what some of the experts in this field have said. And I'm going to show you some examples, take you through my definition and the way I look at it in converting the whole technology drive into technology enablement, and then business results and business implications and business imperatives. Then I want to discuss with you the internal impact, because the external impact of digital disruption is plentiful, and a lot of discussion has gone on, but the focus of this webinar is on the impact of disruption, driven by technology, on the internal of the firm. So how is it that the firm is about to change is basically where I'm headed for this discussion. And time permitting, I'm going to show you an example of all of these things meshed together, basically how we're confusing technology for business, how a technological change is moving us in the direction of digital disruption. However, it may not be digital disruption in and of itself. It needs further definition and process and other capability parameters coming around it in order to make it truly meaningful when it comes to digital disruption. So I'm going to be speaking for about 40 minutes. I think we have a couple of poll questions for you, and then towards the end of this webinar we have about 10-15 minutes for you to ask us questions. So please start submitting your questions to Sonika so that we have them in time. Now, this is the classic definition of disruption. You're causing something to leave its normal trajectory and go on a different trajectory. So this is not an incremental change where you're doing something which causes a slight shift. This is cataclysmic. This is something, disruption, by its very definition, a fundamental change. Whether it's a fundamental change in a market, or it's a fundamental change in an industry, it's a fundamental change in a company, it has to be something that is just blowing up things. It's basically the old way is out and there's something fundamentally different which is happening today. So just to give you a flavor for what disruption can look like, if we were to go through some of the examples that we've seen in our lives which are outside of technology. So the advent of medicine, it fundamentally changed the human, our entire civilization was changed by the advent of medicine. If you look at closer to technology, how did the jet engine change transportation? How did gasoline change transportation? So if you go back and look at the automobile, you look at the jet engine, you look at some of the air conditioning, you look at some of the more major, massive disruptions in our civilization, they have happened as a result of disruptive technologies and science. However, these changes are fundamentally changing whatever it is that we were used to prior to their advent. Clayton Christensen has come up with his theory of disruptive innovation. So one thing I want you to focus on is the connection between disruption and innovation. Having said that, I'd like to emphasize that the definition of innovation is not new, because definition, if you go back to the classic definition of Rogers, we're talking about new to you too. It's also changes made to existing things. But I'm not going to focus on the innovation aspects of things just to make the connection between disruption and innovation. But I also want to go through this classic definition of disruption that Mr. Christensen has come up with. What he is saying is that you typically have companies that are focused on incremental sustaining innovation, which is basically you have a product, you have a market, and you know your market's needs, so you just keep coming up with incremental innovations, making your product more sophisticated, because the reason is very simple. You're making money in the marketplace. It's not easy for you to just change your product or change your market, so you continue to give your market more and more sophisticated products. Consequently, you leave a certain segment of the market open for new entrants. Now, these new entrants will come in at a lower cost with a level of sophistication in the product which is less than what you have. And consequently, they'll get mass adoption, and as a result, they will basically defeat you, because over time, they have started from a place which may be less sophisticated, cheap, commodity items, but they will then enhance them and slowly at some point begin to challenge you. That, in a nutshell, is what he's saying about this disruptive innovation. Now, for the longest time, his theory was not contested, but of late, at least the articles that I've read over the last 2, 3, 4 years, his theory is being contested. And there's good reason for that theory to be contested. And one of the biggest points for us to object to this theory is on the level of sophistication. But I, again, don't want to make this about the theory of disruptive innovation. I just want to highlight that there is a theory that describes innovation, connection to disruption, and this is what that theory is describing. And then I'm going to go through my views on what is missing from this theory and what innovation is all about. So now we've seen what disruption is. What exactly is digital disruption? So the classic definition here, again, you could say that it's, with the advent of the internet, all of a sudden things are being digitized. Hence, it's about internet plus disruption. So this busy diagram here, I've just taken, Gary Hayes's media and platform convergence, where he's talking about the interactivity of devices and then the portability, is how the world is moving from, your old instruments, PCs, to laptops, to handhelds, and so on and so forth, and then the convergence that is happening as a result. So now you're basically going through to this one device that is now going to rule the world and do everything that you want. Now, if you look through this continuum, you look and you ask yourself, what is happening here? Is every stage a disruptive stage, or is there incremental enhancement that is happening, but all of these different enhancements may not necessarily be disruptive? So the point I'm trying to make is that the magnitude of change that came about with the invention of the automobile is the magnitude of the same change happened with the advent of the iPod. So you had the radio first, then you got recording devices, then you got two-in-ones, which basically were a radio and a recording device in one. Then you had a Walkman, and then you had a miniaturized Walkman, which basically was iPod. On the other hand, if you go from the invention of the telephone all the way to iPad, now are we talking whether an iPad is truly disruptive or not? So those are the kinds of things we need to start to focus on if we are to truly understand what is disruptive, what is incremental, what is really not giving us that massive change, massive fundamental change in an industry or a business, supply chain, value chain. I wanted to show you this picture because this is perhaps the most dramatic picture I could personally find on the impact of a truly disruptive event, product, change in the marketplace. As you can clearly see, that digital music, the adoption was just phenomenal. So there are two things that are happening here. One is that the adoption is just absolutely phenomenal. You can see the chart to your right. You can see how massive this change because of digital disruption has happened. So the question that we need to ask ourselves is digital disruption telling us that there needs to be massive change? And that's a question I leave to you, and I'm going to be asking this towards the end of the presentation. The second thing that that diagram also showed, but this is more dramatic, and this also makes the connection between disruption and innovation, and I have just added the digital portion of it because, quite frankly, this discussion applies to it. If you go with the classic digital diffusion, you will notice that it's a bell curve, but it's a pretty wide bell curve. And from the early adopters to laggards, you basically have a very smooth, long transition. What happens, and this is, by the way, from a Deloitte presentation, and Deloitte has done a fantastic job, checking through industries and such that are going through this digital disruption. So I would very highly recommend going to Deloitte's site and downloading that whole research. It's a very, very nice piece of work that they've done. But you can see the dramatic speed with which digital disruption or innovation that percolates through. So you'll notice how both the width of change and the height of this bell curve has fundamentally changed. So again, is digital disruption faster adoption also? Are those the characteristics, or are those the fundamental elements of digital disruption? Again, a question that we need to think about, and we're going to talk about in in a few minutes. Along the same lines is this question of, well, we have seen the telephone moving from rotary to digital to, cordless to handheld and such. This is, and I don't necessarily agree with this line of thinking because it's not well thought through. However, this is moving in the right direction. We're saying that change necessarily does not mean disruption. Change can be incremental, but there is a certain category of change. There is a certain type of change that fundamentally blows up the existing order of things. And that change, and only that change, can be considered as being disruptive. So when we look at the definition of disruption and how this word is just bandied about, that people start to throw this word, oh, this is disruptive, or that is disruptive, we need to understand that disruption has to be at a certain scale and a certain value. It has to be massive in order to be truly considered a disruption, and that same thing applies to digital disruption. For the sake of completeness, this thing is talking about the convergence in publishing and printing, and this particular diagram is depicting how some very incremental change has actually gone through to become some massive disruption. So having given you this 50,000-foot level definition of disruption and digital disruption, here are the points that I believe make digital disruption possible. These are the points, these are to me the core elements of disruption. These to me are core elements of digital disruption. Innovative business model, the first one. Now, most of us tend to focus on, a lot of the industry is focused on product. And I argue that it's not the product, it's the business model. And I'm going to differentiate that in just one second. It's the business model that determines whether this is a true disruption or this is something which is just changing. So just because you change a product does not mean that you're going to be causing disruption. Since we're talking about technology-driven disruption, I've put technology enablement. We're going to talk about the key enablers that are happening around us. We all know them: cloud computing, data, virtualization, all of those wonderful things that are happening around us. I am carefully choosing the word enabler. I'm not using the word driver, because to me the business model is the driver, the business need is the driver, the market opportunity is the driver. So I'm using the word enablement. I'm not using the word causation. So I think a lot of times we tend to confuse between what is enabling something versus what is causing it. The third concept is where we all understand today because of globalization, and the trend is towards the organization's boundary being broken up. Now, what I am saying is that concept is being taken to a fundamentally different level, where not only is the boundary being broken, it's actually being redefined. And the redefinition is happening where the boundaries are being redrawn around an ecosystem. And that ecosystem is where we need to put our focus. And in any disruptive innovation, in anything which is massive, fast, all of the characteristics that we have described in our previous conversation to this point, that ecosystem is a key enabler of disruption. The next point is about people converting a product to a service. So if I were to take the example of Uber for this discussion, taxis are still taxis, but what has Uber done? Uber has basically said that I'm going to take fractional ownership of cars, of automobiles, and I'm going to convert that into a service, and that service is now competing against the old taxi model, which also was fractional, but then the fractional ownership was to another owner, but now people who own cars can actually deploy them to provide the service of transportation to other people. So if you look at I don't want to go too much into Uber, but basically the core concept of a lot of the disruption that is happening is where products are being converted into service. Cloud computing is converting servers into a service. And it is my hypothesis that one of the core pillars of disruption is the conversion of product to services. The next concept is all of these technologies that we talk about, whether it's Facebook or LinkedIn or in general social media or Web 2.0, that is touching upon another concept which I believe is fundamental to this, which is user experience and humanizing technology. Because I believe that is core to adoption, that's core to diffusion, and that's both those concepts are core to the massive adoption that is needed in order for a disruption to take place. The sixth concept is no contracts. So the old world focused more on how can I keep things secret? How can I get a leg up through copyright? How can I, today, open source, today, adoption, again, which I believe to be a fundamental, need or a fundamental driver or a fundamental enabler of any disruption, requires that anything that you create is available without hindrances, without any artificial boundaries being drawn around that product, concept, service. So open source, no contract, take it and use it is an absolutely essential part of something which you want to become massive and disrupt the normal order of things. The next concept I believe is fundamental to any disruption is free marketplace. So you have to have a mechanism or a method for exchange which is easily available. You don't have to go through sales forces. You don't have to go through, a whole process in order to acquire something. So it's great that you don't have contracts, but it's even better if now your product can be found on a GitHub, if your product can be found openly, where I can actually, when I visit for other products, and I can find your product at the same place. So to me, these are the 7 parameters. There's the 7 elements, the 7 components, the 7 absolutely essential elements of disruption. But here's where I believe all of these 7 are pointing to one thing and enabling one thing, which is lower transaction cost. The rationale and the reason behind a lot of us have focused on the fact that there is the labor in third world countries, whether it's China or India or whoever, is cheap, and hence globalization is happening. Well, globalization is happening because of lower transaction costs, and it's not me. This is actually a Nobel laureate who came up with this lower transaction cost theory. His name is Ron Coase, and we're going to be talking about his theory. So these 7 elements, we're going to be talking a little bit about their impact. And the next the half of this presentation, this webinar, this discussion is about us talking about how that has affected the internals of the firm. I'm not going to focus on the externals, on the markets and the customers. I'm going to focus on the internals. But before we move on, Sonika, can we please push the poll results from the previous poll so we can see what people thought about the question that we posed to them?
Yes, Saurabh. We have the question that was asked was, should the CIO take a leading, or should they lead in managing digital disruption? And for the most part, everybody either agreed or strongly agreed. So 88% of the respondents agree or strongly agree that the CIO should take the lead in managing digital disruption. There are about 6% who disagree, and another 6% are not sure. Saurabh?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Well, it so turns out that I tend to agree with the people who are saying the CIO should take a lead role. I think the CIO position, the threat comes from the fact that digital is now part of corporate business. And technology being at the center of it, this position is going to be under threat to do something about it. So I believe the CIO must start to take a lead, because this is no longer the technology enablement paradigm. This is actually a technology driver paradigm. So I tend to agree with you, and now you'll see how and why I focused on the internals of the firm, because that is where the CIO can actually start to see how this whole disruption, technology-driven disruption, is actually changing the internals of the firm. So we're going to be talking a little bit more about each one of these factors. But before we do that, Sonika, can you please push the second poll so that we can have a discussion around it when we're done with this? So please take a minute to give us your opinion on the question that we've asked, and then we'll talk about it in a
Okay, Saurabh, we are done.
great. So poll is in. Now let's talk about the first item that I had mentioned about why is it that I believe. See, anybody who's well versed in marketing, and this is another area where I think all of us in the technology community need to start thinking about these things beyond the technology and product realm. Anybody who's done anything in marketing understands that it's not the product alone, it's a product offering, which so you can have a great automobile, but if you want to sell it, then you need to wrap it under warranty, you need to wrap it under service, you need to wrap it under a financing plan. So all of these various elements then combine into making it a product offering. So if we tend to focus on, wow, what a great product iPod is or iPad is or iPhone is, or we miss the basics of the product offering that is coming from Apple. And more importantly, we're missing the bigger picture, which is there would be no Apple, there would be no Google, there would be no IBM. Well, IBM is in trouble in any event, but they'll come back. What we're going to miss is this whole concept of business model. In my worldview, business model is central. It's the core. It's the DNA of any organization, whether it's for-profit or not-for-profit. This is what decides, this is what determines the overall trajectory of that corporation, organization, whatever you want to call it. And this is where most of us in technology need to focus on in order to understand what exactly is a business model. So this is a simple rendition. There's very, very complicated models around business models, so you can look them up, and on CIO Index we've got Osterwalder's model. There are many different better explanations of business models, but this actually gets the job done because it simplifies what it is that a business model is. So essentially what is happening is that if you look at any organization, it has some core competencies. So that is internal to that organization, something that you do better than somebody else. And these are competencies that are unique to your organizations, whether you have them or you develop them or you just happen to fall upon them, whatever it may be, this is where your organization excels. You might want to develop them, but at the end of the day, at the point at which you're a contender, at the point at which you're actually able to compete, you must have a set of core competencies that you and only you possess. Then you combine them with the relationship. So if you look at a very simple thing, that any automobile manufacturer who wants to enter the United States, for example, a new market, must have relationships in dealerships, in terms of financing, in terms of all of the other trappings of being able to sell and distribute a product. The entire value chain must be enabled. The entire supply chain must be enabled. So those relationships, which are external to you, they combine to create a differentiated value in your organization, in your company, in your not-for-profit, in your government organization. When you combine this differentiated value, see how I am stepping away from the definition of product. We're talking about competencies, we're talking about relationships, and we're talking about value. the offering that I was mentioning to you, a minute ago. And then you decide what segment of the market. This is where the customer demographics, this is where the customer psychographics, they come in, their behavior, their needs, their wants, and you, whether it exists or you're going to create it. That's the question. Creating is not that simple, and hence the whole disruption thing comes in as to how to make it easier. So if you see how all of these concepts converge, is on there is an existing market segment. You enter that market segment because you've got now better value. So product plus all of the other trappings. And now you say to yourself, I'm going to grab a bigger and bigger share of that marketplace. Are you truly disrupting that marketplace? Are you truly changing the automobile by bringing a new and better car is the question. I believe you're not. But now if you were to say that I bring in a whole new segment by saying that you were driving horse-drawn carriages and now I've given you faster, bigger, better, more efficient, more capacity, capability automobile, now you have fundamentally changed the nature of logistics. And I think that is the fundamental difference between disruption and gaining a bigger and better share of an existing marketplace. There are many, many more distinctions. I'm just giving you a 50,000-foot view since we have a limited time to talk about this. The second element that comes in is value exchange. So you just cannot be creating value. You have to get that value out to the marketplace and get something back in return. And once that value transfer has happened, then and only then can you say, I have truly created shareholder value. If you combine these concepts, this is where you start to understand that a business model needs to change, not just the product, in order for you to become a contender to say, I'm about to disrupt something. Everybody knows these. I've just put them out there for the sake of completeness. These are the things that are happening in our space right now. But these are, in my worldview, these are just technologies. These are things that are happening, wonderful technologies. They're just marvelous technologies, but they are tools. These are, whether it was the internet, whether it was, video or the Internet of Things, P2P, gamification, virtualization, big data. We in the technology world tend to focus too much on the technology and say, everybody's talking about big data, everybody's talking about cloud computing, as if they're ends in themselves. If you look at what is happening to IBM today, and this is an internal business of the tech industry, you will notice that these technologies themselves are not doing what is happening to IBM. IBM's failure to understand the business implications of these technologies is what is causing a $20+ billion drop in revenues, a 20-30% drop in service revenues. So that is what is, the share price dropped, $8 yesterday. So that is basically what is causing the pain, is to understand where and how technology can be leveraged and how it impacts business. The third concept that I promised we're going to be talking about is transaction costs. And this is a really busy picture that I've downloaded from Wikipedia, I believe. What it is saying is a very simple thing. This is a theory of transaction costs. It's a Nobel Prize winning theory by Ron Coates. He said a very simple thing. He was asked a question as to why is it that some companies grow? Why does a firm grow? And he said that it's the concept that he postulated, and again, I'm oversimplifying the simple concept. The concept that he said was that when a firm can make something cheaper than getting it from the outside, then it'll make it, and the size of the firm is going to grow. When it can get it done outside for the cheap, it's going to get other people to do it for them. So you see how this whole globalization is happening. Now, nowhere in this theory is a factor of competence or capability of the provider or the vendor or whoever the external elements are. Is the only thing they're saying is that if there's a certain transaction cost associated with procuring anything, identifying it, selecting it, trying to find the person, all of the contracts that go in, managing the relationship. There's a whole bunch of stuff that goes on in a relationship which is external to the firm. And if that cost is higher than you being able to make it inside, then you will choose to make it inside. Again, let's not confuse this with the whole competency issue. Let's not confuse it with confidentiality. There's certain things which are strategic, tactical. We're not getting into that discussion. I'm just giving you a very brief overview of what it is that is driving globalization and what it is that is driving disruption. So when you look at an Uber or any other service that comes to mind, please focus on how it is lowering transaction costs. And so far, to me at least, I have been able to nail every single really, truly disruptive technology with the amount of transaction costs that it has managed to reduce for the business or process or market or anything in question. And consequently, you will notice that the moment these transaction costs start to come down, that's the time at which the adoption, the diffusion of that innovation, all of them, they just skyrocket. And at that point, the innovation truly becomes disruptive. So this is the place where I am disagreeing with the Christensen model of disruptive innovation, because I believe these three things that I've mentioned to you, the business model, the 7 actually, but I'm just mentioning these 3, transaction cost is to me the absolutely critical element of a digital disruption. Now, we spoke about 3 things. I'm not going to be able to go into all of the other ones. In a couple of slides, we're going to talk about a few of them as we move on forward. Now, what is happening around us is the internet being around is a very good thing, but what it's doing is that now you are hyper-connected. Thanks to Facebook, I'm in touch with friends of mine that I left behind in India, about 30 years ago. I'm in touch with my relatives. I'm in touch with my childhood friends. I mean, something happens in my life today is instantaneously communicated to all of them, right? I'm basically, exaggerating the impact, but we have handhelds that are sending us video. We have technologies, implementation, the use of technology has gone from mainframe data centers into the hand of the consumer, into the hand of the business worker. That is an absolutely major cataclysmic change that is happening. The second thing that is happening is the consumer is the producer. What is Facebook? What is Twitter? It's basically you who are driving Twitter. They're just providing you the platform. So the consumer is also the producer. That's the whole point of Web 2.0. That's also the point of most of the changes that are happening around you. These revolutions on Twitter are being enabled by people who are putting pictures of the revolution happening in Egypt or wherever, and that's what is driving a massive change that is occurring around us, that you no longer, people who are producing content, for example, have realized that producing content is no longer a profitable business to be in. You have to convert it into 2 things. You have to convert it into a service. You can see the New York Times of this world now coming up with subscriptions, but you must also understand that we have to move in the direction of the consumer giving us the content that other consumers are going to be taking. Open source is a new normal. Coke formula is fantastic. They're going to hold on to it. But if you want adoption, then you have to go with the model of Twitter. No service, no charge. Just come on in and talk to us. You have to go the model of ICQ. I don't know if you remember ICQ and Hotmail. They were basically all of these services. And the biggest company that has done a tremendous job of this is Google. If you look at Google, it's a huge factory, but they own all of the roads leading up to that factory, whether it's analytics, whether it's anything that Google does, Gmail. What they're doing is that your interaction with the web, they own every single transaction that is happening, and they are saying, take it for free. We're not going to charge you anything. But in effect, what they're doing is they're driving all of that traffic towards the factory of Google, and then Google can then sell them some other things in an indirect manner. That is basically a very open source model where you can download apps, you can basically do stuff for quote unquote free, because that facilitates adoption, that lowers the transaction cost, but at the same time, now you're saying, I'm getting a product and a service, so I'm going to latch onto it. The same thing, confidentiality, the amount of time people in an attorney's, the corporate offices used to spend on confidentiality. Quite honestly, those of you who are American can identify with this land of the free and home of the brave, but how many people entering the doors of an American corporation feel like they're in the land of the free and home of the brave? And the point here is that it's not a political statement, it's actually a business statement. If your company provides for people to feel free, to feel appreciated, to feel entrepreneurial, you are going to succeed in this brave new world being caused by digital disruption. That is my hypothesis. Again, boundaryless world. I don't believe in boundaries being demolished. I believe in boundaries being redefined around an ecosystem. So if you look at Apple's iOS, they've built an ecosystem around there. You look at any other product from Google, Android, they're building their own ecosystem. If you look at Facebook, they're building their own ecosystem. So these ecosystems are developing where you have a sun, but then around it, you have all sorts of players who are playing where their particular organizational boundaries may not be that strong, but the ecosystem's boundaries are pretty strong, and traversing from one planetary system to another is still very difficult. Will it change over the future? I'm sure it will, but today, this is where we are at. All of these I can go into, at great length, but you get the point, and I'm already running late, so I've got to keep on trucking. So folks, what does this mean? What this means is that business models are changing. What it means that work is changing. The basic definition of work is changing, and I give this example of an app developer. Now, what corporate employee is as motivated as an app developer? How many people around you can you say truly know the connection between their work and the stock price of their firm? So today, IBM stock price is down $8 yesterday. Excuse me. How many IBM employees can say because of XYZ that I did, the stock price would have fallen, $20 versus the $8? How many can say because of the work I did not do, the stock price fell? But if you look at the corporation, today's corporation, the app developer, he can tell you how many apps were downloaded and how much money he made. There's a direct connection between work definition, motivation, employee, hiring, identification, performance management. All of these stuffs are changing fundamentally. The workplace is changing. A lot of people bring your own device is a great thing to talk about, but what is it doing? It's basically saying that the workplace of meetings and close proximity is now expanding. So the organizational boundaries within whatever is left of those organizational boundaries is actually also expanding, and you're now seeing people working from home, people continuously and constantly on their cell phones. That is also changing, and the worker is changing. So this, for the internal of the company, this change is profound, and it's happening all around us. So I want to take a couple of minutes, Sonika, and I apologize, I'm already running really late. I want to take a couple of minutes to walk through the 7 elements that I'd laid out, and I want to add a few more elements to what is it that this means for the CIO. What does it mean for us to be thinking about as we move forward and start to take a leadership role in defining how our organization deals with this change, which is coming. This is, to me, one of the sure shot things that is coming. So we need to start thinking in terms of ecosystem, not enterprises. I'm not saying that the enterprise structure is about to be blown away. I'm saying that we must start to move in that direction. Think ecosystem. Think how I can do things with external players without putting constraints in their way. That's number one. Number two, think in terms of services, not products. Because services, by their very nature, have a value statement that a product does not. A service is a continuous thing, a product is a transaction. There are many, many different differences between products and services, but if you want to succeed in this brave new world, you must look in terms of services like IBM is already doing. They basically converted their servers into cloud computing. Amazon showed them the way. You can go on and on about how Apple is coming up with a subscription-based model for their products. This world is moving towards services is my hypothesis. The third factor, I believe, is one of the most fundamental factors that everybody ignores in the technology world specifically. We are all so tech savvy that we forget that our users may not be. So what we forget most of the times is that if we give them gizmos, more features, more functions, it can do this and can do that, we forget one very simple thing. Can they use it? And if you look at, and again I come back to my example of Facebook, if you look at Facebook and see the simplicity, you will realize why is it that all of a sudden The major growth segment for Facebook is not teenagers and millennials. It is actually the 50, 60, 70-year-old retirees who are actually hogging Facebook. So it is our generation and a generation before me, which is basically using Facebook way more because of the simplicity of the user experience. And if you add those features of user experience, humanizing technology, then you will notice more and more people. I'll give you a really cute example. We've made a group on WhatsApp, and part of that group is my 77-year-old mother-in-law. Now, she can't really work the keyboard, but guess what? We get messages from her which are recorded. So she is on WhatsApp interacting with us, and she's in India right now. So what I'm saying is the user experience of WhatsApp is so simple that even a 77-year-old person can easily use it to communicate. Imagine the potential. We need to think in terms of factories and not functions. And this is a concept I just don't have the time to discuss. But the whole focus needs to get away from silos and to profit and value centers is basically what I'm saying. So the whole concept of running IT like a business falls under this paradigm. We can embrace the change or fight it. I believe embracing change is always a good thing. Let people move your cheese, figure out how you're going to deal with it. Work-life balance, if you think about the app developer again, is she or he really thinking about work-life balance? Work is life, life is work. We need to, as corporations, stop thinking about it. There's a very, funny example that I just heard recently about, somebody on maternity leave who took their laptop with them. And the person who was talking to me was complaining that she was actually, using the laptop even though she's on leave. And, so just imagine if she's on leave and she gets out of the power structure of the corporation, do you really think coming back she's going to have a position, a meaningful position? So technology has given her a laptop at home, but technology has not given her work-life balance. We're basically kidding ourselves if we think, getting a laptop in the birthing room is giving work-life balance. The other concept which I fundamentally believe in is free markets. So bringing free market inside the walls, and I could give a whole presentation on this, where what I'm saying is make each employee of the IT organization an app developer, driven by profit motivation. And I'm not saying they need to start selling stuff to you internally. I'm saying there are many different ways of creating a free market environment within the IT organization, within the corporation, and the CIO should be taking a lead building this model, not just within IT, but showing the rest of the organizations as to how you can actually build a free market model that really works for the app developer. It's going to work for the corporation too. You need to not just, learning is like how to learn, right? People are telling you, take this course, take this training. There's a whole different way of learning. Action learning is what I was alluding to here, but again, I don't have the time for this. So folks, I think, I've gone through these things. You can reach out to me. I'm going to give you my email, and we are planning on creating a group on which we can continue this dialogue. Unfortunately, I don't have the time for, the little example I wanted to give you from Walmart. But at a later date, we're going to schedule something where we're going to walk through that whole thing and talk about disruptive innovation in the setting. Walmart stock, by the way, is also down by about 25% over the last 3 months. So they're also in trouble. So we need to see, what they can do. We're going to try and help Walmart, is what I'm saying. Well, thank you so much for listening in to me. Sonika, can you please push the poll results so we can talk about this for a minute, and then we can take questions.
Absolutely, Saurabh. And actually, one of the questions that was asked, before we sent the poll out was, is the CDO role going to replace the CIO role? So that poll, I'll discuss the results of the poll, and you can, share your views on whether the CIO role will be replaced by the CDO role. So it was a very evenly distributed response. About 14% believe that yes, it will be replaced and will be pretty fast in less than 3 years. However, 14% were not sure whether it will or will not be replaced. 27% of the respondents thought it would take about 3 to 5 years still for it to be replaced, but 27% interestingly think that it will never be replaced by the CDO role. what are your what is your thought on that?
It's very interesting. I think the two things that I know are definitely happening. One is that digital is the new way in most organizations. Now, the 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 basic thing about digital is that it transcends organizational boundaries. As it is, we have these silo-based organizations with IT and marketing functions separated. So marketing and IT, those boundaries are definitely eroding. So the question is that does a CIO role become one of only the infrastructure owner, and the marketing department, organization, or function takes over the rest of the elements of digital strategy, for example, or there is a marketing CIO and CMO merging into a CDO role with all of the cloud computing and platform as a service and software as a service taking over technology in a completely utility capacity. So you're no longer driven by technology. You no longer have a massive organization other than a planning architecture organization. So I would not bet on the CDO role taking over the next 3 to 5 years, but I would definitely bet on digital causing these boundaries to shift. So either the CIO now starts to collaborate with the CMO very heavily, the CMO takes over the digital strategy components of things, and then the CIO is only the infrastructure, the technology guy. But these changes are definitely coming over the next 3 to 5 years.
So I think you addressed one of the questions that was asked is, do we see a CDO role or do we see a CIO role, which would be something like a CMTO role where M equals marketing and T equals technology?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think see these silo-based organizations separating IT and marketing, they are forcing you now to create artificial alignments. So the process is what drives value. So the process is going across IT and marketing and a whole bunch of other functions. So I believe that the CDO role, whether it actually exists on paper, it'll definitely exist figuratively. That has to happen, because to me, these two things are so intertwined in digital that a chief marketing officer taking over digital strategy, to me, is not the right answer, because they're going to be missing huge chunks of capability that'll be in the IT organization. So they have to figure out how they actually work together. But it's still up in the air.
Saurabh, you mentioned that adoption is a fundamental driver of any disruptive innovation. What do you think about innovations that are said to be disruptive in design? Or
Uh,
disruptive by design, I'm sorry. Innovation.
right. So see, innovation, innovation in and of itself is disruptive by design, right? So you're trying to bring something new to change something. Whether that's new to you or whether it's new to the world is what the classic definition of innovation is. So yeah, you're trying to do it, but are you going to be able to? So Sony's Betamax was an innovation, but it failed. So to me, the failure or success by definition is how many people are using it. So in order for you to bring about change, people have to accept that change, and that is what adoption is. And diffusion is how many. How far does this change go? And the third element that is adding in today's shortened cycles is how fast is this happening. So how far, how much, and how fast is basically describing today's digital disruption. Change has always been a constant. I mean, you basically have changes coming all the time. But today, the cycle time has shrunk so much that it's coming faster. Technology has pushed it farther. And the impact is more massive because we are in a technology-driven and dependent world.
Saurabh, are there industry or popular frameworks to understand or trace the impact of evolution of digital facets in an organization?
I am aware of a few attempts. I've already mentioned the Deloitte paper. I would recommend downloading that. They go into these parameters. There are a bunch of others, but I want to stay away from recommending because I don't align, and I don't even align with the Deloitte point of view completely. So I'm not going to be recommending any, but there are a couple, and if you send me an email, I'll forward you the links.
Okay. Saurabh, do you, in your views, do you think that digital disruption has happened in agriculture?
uh, that's a good question. I haven't even thought about that. I am going to have to think about it. This is a very interesting question. I'm going to think about it and get back to you. I've really not given that much thought.
Okay, so apparently GE has both CIO and digitation officers, different levels of responsibility, but productivity is based on collaboration. Would you like to comment on that?
It's the old model, right? I mean, if you go back to 15, 17 years ago, this is how it started. You had the CIO, then you had the head of e-business, which is the digitization officer, and then you had the chief marketing officer. In my experience, and I've experienced this personally in two places, that model is just set up for failure. So the boundary question, and especially in a corporate setting, keeps coming up. And these three roles, if they exist the way they do, I think they're just going to be butting heads. This is, and anybody who's been in a corporation understands how territorial our titles become. There is no shared sacrifice. There is no shared, sharing. So marketing's bonuses are different than, the IT organization's bonuses, for example. And then the head of e-business all of a sudden comes in and they're doing their cool stuff, and I'm not doing as cool. So it's basically a recipe for disaster, is what I would say. But again, I don't know enough about GE's internals to say it's going to be a disaster there. I just feel that these silo-based structures need to be brought down, and we need to be more process-based, more process-focused, and process compensation. And that's when this will truly have a meaningful impact. Otherwise, you're going to have a bunch of really, really frustrated people in all three camps. I'm not saying that the only frustration is with the CIO or the CMO or the chief digitization officer or the head of e-business. I think all of them are going to be really frustrated, and so are their staff's going to be.
So I think when I mentioned that the productivity was based on collaboration, it was actually a typo. So our attendee who asked the question has corrected that. He said that there is actually no collaboration instead of
Yeah,
based
it's
on.
see again. I do not want to comment on specifics of the internals of an organization, but if somebody were to be asking me whether this is a good idea, me, Saurabh Hajela, would say no, this is not a good idea.
Saurabh, there are so many more questions. I think I'll get to one final one, and then we can personally respond to those that have come by. And I'm going to combine two or three together so that you can address those. So the first one, of course, is based. We're talking about the CIO. So how should a CIO prepare for digital disruption? What role should the CIO play in the digital disruption? And how can we assess the success or failure of digital disruption?
This is a big question. See, I think the elements that we discussed today, if you focus on the business model, if you focus on what is driving that business model, what is changing the environment, and then you focus on the implications on the various elements of capability within the organization, then and only then can you come up with the imperatives for you to act. And that analysis, the CIO is in a really good position to do that analysis because this is a technology-driven change. So you know what is coming. You can see around you. There are different models. So if you were to, for example, predict the future of the internet, to me, you should follow the telephone and see what the telephone did. and you will notice the similarities between all of the different websites and apps. And if you were to forget for a moment the website or the app or whatever and focus on the functionality as to what was the value delivered, what was the offering, you will notice the similarities, and you can really predict the way forward. I'm not saying one for one, but you can certainly get 20, 30, 40% of what is coming, and think like a futurist and say, okay, so I've seen this happen in the past with the telephone, with the automobile, and this may be a similar change. How do I see this trajectory? And most of the way I understand the world has come from understanding those changes and seeing, so the CIO must take the lead. The CIO has a unique position to take the lead, and if we do this right, I think we can truly get that place at the table, truly make a meaningful impact for the organization and create value.
Thank you so much, Saurabh. You know, we really, you've given us a very relevant and interesting presentation and have certainly left us with a lot to think about. And I want to thank all our attendees today for joining us. I hope you all enjoyed this webinar. Your feedback is really appreciated as we continually strive to improve upon what we deliver to our members. And I would recommend that if you would like to attend more webinars, please see our upcoming webinars on our events page on cioindex.com. A recording of this webinar will also be available shortly on our events page. And if you wish to exit, you may exit the webinar by simply clicking on the X on your control panel or by choosing File, then Exit. Thank you once again for joining us, and have a great day.